10 Days on the Tokaido from 9 Years in Nippon by Henry Faulds. This is recorded to celebrate the 10th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Days on the Tokaido. Amongst the many overlapping geographical divisions that distract travelers and students, none perhaps has been so permanently popular as that which is connected with the great old highways of Japan. Suppose we were daily accustomed to divide England into great districts or circuits according to our railway systems, as the Midland, the Great Northern, and so forth, we should then have some idea of this peculiar arrangement. The Tokaido, or East Sea Way, is the road inclusive of the bordering country which runs close by the southern shore of the Hondo, or chief island from Kyoto, the old capital, eastward on to Tokyo. Along with an American professor I have arrived in Kobe by steamer through a rather tempestuous sea, sick, dirty, and miserable, amid a pallid crowd of woe-begone Japanese fellow-passengers, if possible more sick and miserable even than ourselves. The rain was pouring in torrents, and a piercing wind chilled our very marrows as we landed. After a good hot bath, a sound sleep, and a very hearty midday breakfast, we walked round the settlement, which had been thoroughly well washed down by the rain. Kobe is a modern, foreign-built town, with regular, well-laid-out streets. The houses are usually tinted in two colors, according to the Italian style, and have a very pleasing appearance. The settlement seemed to be raised on a succession of broad scrub-clad gravel terraces, and is closed in by a high range of hills crowned with patches of dark wood and scraggy brushwood. Close by is Hyogo, a characteristic old native town, where there is now the spacious terminus of a well-laid railway which runs to Osaka and Kyoto, and will yet, it is hoped, soon reach Tokyo. A waterfall of no great volume, a one-horse fall, my friend termed it, is the chief attraction to visitors about Kobe. The dark vegetation surrounding it was, however, very romantic and beautiful, and one or two pious persons were shiveringly doing the cold water drip penance, which I suppose is a religious substitute for our honest British B&S, at a considerable rill beside the main volume of water. After drifting about the settlement in rather an aimless manner, we took tickets for Osaka, which was then the temporary terminus of the railway. The railway crosses at a high level a spur of the range that encloses Kobe, and then darts down towards Osaka, straight as an arrow, by a series of alternating slopes and levels, which had rather a striking appearance from the top of the incline. The traffic even then was very good, and seemed to bid fair for the ultimate success of railways in Japan. It is now, I understand, almost as great as that on any line of similar capacity in our own country, and the returns are good. Osaka was formerly the chief commercial town of Japan, and is still a city of not less than 400,000 inhabitants, boasting of a very old moated castle of much historical interest, a modern mint, an arsenal, and a considerable garrison. Few foreigners live there, and those are chiefly either missionaries or government employees. It is situated not far from the sea, on the banks of a shallow river, which must some day soon be deepened, and the city is intersected by numerous canals meeting at right angles. The houses which overhang the canals have a very characteristic Japanese look, and remind me strongly of some quaint old illustrations in works of romance. From certain points a little above the city we could see away out at sea white specks of sail glinting in the sunlight, which recalled a famous voyage made ages ago by a citizen of credit and renown, a sort of poetical Pepys of the period, for an interesting account of whose Old World diary we are indebted to Mr. Aston, our scholarly Consul General in Korea. After roaming about the endless half-dead and alive streets, we found a French hotel and had dinner, which combined most of the worst features of Japanese and French systems of cookery, and had a splendid cup of coffee which almost atoned for all that had gone before. We had brought with us a Japanese servant, who amused us with somewhat preposterous stories of his own doughty doings in the great wars which preceded the Restoration, and who described his marching as one of the guards of a train of bullock carts laden with solid gold, which he is quite sure has been cleverly secreted somewhere by the officials of the Shogun's time, to be unearthed when some great crisis arrives. This now peaceful warrior was sent to forage for jinrikishas, and soon arrived, flushed and argumentative, with a grand array of those useful vehicles and the drawers thereof. It seemed as if such terms of payment as the law gravely lays down had never once been proposed in Japan before, but we drove a bargain at last after much forensic display, for Mr. Mankichi was an accomplished amateur lawyer as well as an invincible warrior. Indeed, his character was quite kaleidoscopic, for we soon became involved with him in almost fierce discussions on astronomy and the ultimate causation of fossils. After lots had been cast by means of straws, a bargain was struck at the despised rate, and the crowd of disappointed candidates retired, grinning good-naturedly in Japanese fashion at their bad luck. It is best in travelling in hot weather over dusty roads to avoid white linen clothes. Some prefer Chinese blue flannel, others duck, with military collar to the coat. The popular white suit becomes hopelessly grimy and degraded looking after a few miles. I find a most useful thing is a small snap bag with provender, and a kori, a kind of basket woven of thin flexible bamboo laths, in two portions, the one overlapping the other like a grass or cane tobacco pouch, and so varying in capacity with the need of it. Others are made of willow. They can be rolled up in the tough, unterrible oil paper of the country, and then strapped behind the hood of the jinrikisha. A satchel is useful to have across one's shoulder to contain geological or botanical specimens when on foot. Two good runners will carry yourself and light luggage along, without undue fatigue, at the rate of about 7 miles an hour, and will run with 1 or 2 short intervals for rest and refreshment for 7 or 8 hours in one day, or even longer in an emergency. For a short distance, in mild weather and on an exceptionably good road, very rapid work is sometimes done. I think, however, that tourists have often shown a tendency to exaggerate the staying powers of the coolies. When pitted against professional runners, Japanese jinrikisha men have been badly beaten. I have myself drawn a loaded jinrikisha for a short distance, and the labor is less than one might suppose, when some momentum has been acquired. The men do not suffer severely from their occupation, as far as a medical experience of 9 years, chiefly in dispensary practice, enables me to judge. On the contrary, I think they are on the whole a very healthy class, and the broken-down members of it are chiefly those who have already failed in other spheres, from intemperance or bad health, or idleness. Those men slink into by-lanes for hire, and carry priests, sick folk, and old women, bent on doing shopping, at lower than the usual fares. An active jinrikisha man can earn a fair wage, and has a reasonable prospect of living quite as long as is good for him. I know of no special diseases to which they are subject, but have seen some bad cases of rheumatism, bronchitis, and so forth, from exposure in bad weather, just as in the case of farming and other out-of-door work. I have also seen a few cases of varicose veins in the legs, but that affection is more frequent amongst English shopkeepers who stand most of the day, than amongst the car drivers of Japan. Soon we passed the old castle, with its ivied cyclopean walls on our right, running along a low embankment through wide marshy tracts, interspersed with rice fields, and closed in with beautiful blue-tinted mountains, lying low on the horizon below banks of gloriously moulded silvery clouds. When we reached a hamlet in the suburbs called Moriguchi-cho, the coolies became insubordinate, and an amount of unintelligible but eloquent slang was expended that promised to leave little breath for the long pull before them. A formal appeal to the wizened, tremulous old elder of the community resulted in a bargain being formally drawn out and solemnly sealed. Signing is not a Japanese custom. The project was one which I have since found to be very common. The city coolies hoped to sell out their contract to the villagers at a profit to themselves. It is rather disagreeable to have the consciousness of being sold in this way. Many are the reasons alleged for the breach of contract, such as a broken spring, mysterious spasms, or a thorn in the foot, and no one need wonder that the trick very often succeeds. After we got on our way again, the sky was yellowing (it rather rarely reddens here) for sunset, and soon we sunk into a gloomy valley which night had already reached. Here we had to alight and walk through marshes, rustling with bulrushes, to an invisible ferry boat, which many farmers, hawkers, and others were very patiently waiting for. Dark shadows were now falling over the reedy flats, and the plaintive cries of various waterfowls quivered through the silent fen. The sun was now only indicated by an oval slanting glow like that of the zodiacal light, and one by one pale stars tremulously peeped forth from a marvellously clear sky. The conversation quite naturally turned on astronomy, and it was curious to hear how well informed were some of the intending passengers regarding a system supposed to have been introduced into China 2,000 years before the Star of Bethlehem struck chill terror into Herod's heart. After crossing the ferry to the rather rare accompaniment of a genuine Japanese song, we had a long ride through dim-lit villages, inhabited by rough and dangerous people as we were warned in one case, dark hedgerows and dreary rice-fields, and at length, when we were fairly nodding with sleep, we passed through what seemed interminable miles of long dark streets, at every corner of which I felt that a bloody tragedy might fitly have been enacted. At last we stopped at a cheery, well-lit hotel, romantically Japanese in structure, but with much European comfort about it, and there we found right good welcome in the native fashion, and the best of good cheer. On the morning we climbed a picturesque slope behind the hotel, through a winding woodland path, smelling of fresh pine resin, and visited the red-painted Buddhist shrines and temples that cluster beneath the umbrageous foliage of many lofty and venerable trees. I made many notes on details, which, however, I am sure would not be very interesting to readers. The temple servants were just swinging the heavy wooden ram which does duty in Japanese temples for a bell-clapper, striking the bell powerfully from the outside, but with great softness of effect. We were really startled when the first sonorous boom of a bronze giant quivered through the leafy gloom in most musical waves, went echoing in ever-mellowing tones down through the hot city, and trembled in fainter and fainter vibrations far away across the valley to the bosky shrine-crowned heights beyond. Bells in Japanese temple grounds are often made of the molten contributions in hard cash of pious believers, and the custom seems to me a very suggestive and pretty one. It is from this cause, the priests tell us, that the tone of their bells is so notably sweet, for gold and silver enter in considerable proportion into the composition of some of their finest bells, a fact which has been confirmed by chemical analysis in one case at least. With a fine combination of American push and Scottish prudence, we had applied for permission to visit the Imperial Palace, which was not then usually so open to visitors as it afterwards became. We were therefore greatly gratified to have a visit in an hour or so afterwards from a most courteous official of the municipality, who favored us with a special permit from the Chiji, a sort of perpetual Lord Mayor, of this grand old royal city of Kyoto. I have little to say of the palace. It was spacious, costly, and severely plain in many respects, but there was little in it to interest any one but a professional tourist. We spent the evening looking over the latest English and American papers we could find, none of them very fresh, and when the shades of evening fell rather suddenly over the valley in which the old city lies embosomed so beautifully, we were surprised to see the river's bed, which was almost dry, suddenly glowing into one wide ruddy blaze of light, while one long street, lined on either side with colored paper lanterns, stretched away in two straight beams, till the lines converged into a vanishing point in the hazy distance. It was the annual festival of the river opening, in which Kyoto, fortunately for us, is always to be seen in its best and most characteristic aspects. The contrast between the lemon-yellow sky, still luminous with the last rays of a dying sun, the dark wooded sides of the valley, and the ruddy glow of torches and colored lamps, was as fascinating as any fairy dream of a young schoolgirl after her first pantomime. We hurried over dinner and made for the town, so as to see what the festive citizens were about. The gait, dress, and manners of the Kyoto ladies are much more pleasing and refined than those of Tokyo, and their hair is always prettily dressed. There is generally throughout the community more old-fashioned punctilious etiquette, and the language is spoken with greater fastidiousness, both in respect to clear enunciation and the choice of words and phrases. The atrocious nasal sound of G, which prevails in Tokyo, is quite unheard in Kyoto. Kyoto is noted for its fans, so I invested in a few choice artistic specimens for friends. One of them contained a well-drawn fanciful group of the great classic authors of Japan, male and female. Another very pleasing one was composed of the different kinds of maple leaf known in the country, and contained great variety of form and color gracefully contrasted. In lecturing on Darwinism, I pointed out the fact that a Japanese artist had thus found beauty in all the so-called accidental varieties, and so objective beauty might be considered as a phase of utility in viewing the universe teleologically, as it was still possible to do. This and similar illustrations, I found, had been very effective, as addressed to a highly educated Japanese audience. We spent some time amidst the giddy throng in the dry river's bed, listening to open-air story-tellers, laughing at mummers, indulging in sips of tea and peppermint toffee, and chatting in a free and easy way to the world and his very sedate wife. As we retracted our steps, warm and weary, the hedges of mingled cryptomeria, privet, and fern were mysteriously lit up here and there by the pale lambent green light of glow-worms, while now and again a star-like firefly floated silently amongst the foliage. I have seen much larger and brighter ones when travelling through Bengal, and I never saw in Japan, what is often a very striking and mysterious phenomenon nearer the tropics, the rhythmic simultaneous twinkling of all of the members of a single group of fireflies. We were just in time to see, by the dim candlelight of many paper lanterns, in the court of an adjoining house, a grand display of old-fashioned court dancing, or rather posturing in operatic costume, varying with the nature of the piece to be performed. It was rather a dull performance, and far too artificial to interest even a Japanese. Before leaving Kyoto we paid a visit to a porcelain establishment, and were pleased to see artists painting extempore designs of great beauty with a firm, free hand. In a tank close by I noticed a great eft-like brute, which lay quite still. It was a splendid specimen of the gigantic salamander of Japan. I obtained a dead specimen of a kind of tree frog called kajika, a contradiction for kawashika, river deer, which is found at Arashiyama, about 4 or 5 miles from Kyoto, a district famous for its fine cherry trees. Those frogs are prized greatly for their fine musical voice, which resembles the sweet chirp of some tree crickets, and, like them, they are kept in cages. They are fed on flies when in confinement. Similar frogs occur in 1 or 2 other parts of Japan, and I had once the good fortune to hear one in Tokyo, chirping in a very sweet and mellow tone, which I am not musician enough to describe. We visited all that was to be seen in Kyoto, which left a very charming impression on me, so little does it seem to differ from the Kyoto one reads of in old world tales of the feudal times that have fled forever. We walked on a rough newly laid road to Otsu, got caught in a deluge of rain, and in the circumstances had a rather dispiriting view of the great fresh-water lake of Japan, called Biwa, from its supposed resemblance in shape to the Japanese lute of that name. We spent our first night on the way to Tokyo at Ishibe. The people were very attentive, and soon after we retired for the night, closed our shutters, depriving us of every breath of air. We had made a successful appeal against this arrangement when an old night watchman appeared on the scene, and roused the dormant echoes and inmates by a pair of loud clappers, which he worked with painfully frequent iteration. We ventured to expostulate, but were at once offered our choice of either sharp horn, suffocation, or sleeplessness. Knowing the vigilance of the watchman would soon succumb, we preferred to have some air. Just as I had expected, the worthy old guardian of our safety soon quietly dropped off to sleep, but rose once or twice suddenly ere cock-crow, and made up for long silence by an unusually vehement clattering of his sticks. It is so always in Japan. The silent watchman is believed to be asleep. He must attest his vigilance by audible evidence of it. We were soon passing curious raised river beds, which have been formed like those on the great plains of Lombardy, and sometimes like them break their bonds and rush upon the plain below. We spent a quiet restful Sunday at Sono. Some villagers brought specimens of quartz with pyrites, which they suspected might be gold. My friend, who had had some experience at the Californian diggings, was struck with the resemblance to auriferous rocks which some of those specimens bore. I went to the temple and found an old farmer enjoying a "crack" with the rector. No notice whatever was taken of my presence, but when I asked some questions as to the temple, civil answers were returned, and the conversation opened up pleasantly. Goyu was our next stopping place, where we had to ourselves a clean, pretty little room, opening on a charming artificial garden, with a river bridge in the distance and a mountainous background of romantic loveliness. After that we spent a night in a large empty house in Shiraska, whose custom seemed to be leaving it, judging from the oppressive civility we received. There were several ironwood trees in the garden, and nothing else. The mats were all edged with red cloth, the reason for which I did not understand, and I do not remember of seeing it elsewhere in Japan. At Tsutagawa we got into a junk, and others joined us, so that we had a large company. The sails flapped as soon as we started, and then a dead calm with a sultry sky set in. I cannot recall another so dreary episode in my life as this voyage turned out to be. We were soon afflicted with violent cramps, which relieved the monotony a little, but the natives even got irritable with the heat and sense of helpless stagnation, and no one could be induced to try an oar, lest a sufficient breeze should afterwards arise, and there would then have been so much dead loss of energy, don't you see? In one vast shallow creek which we poled through, there were great shoals of tiny fish about the size of sprats, which rose clear out of the water like flying fish. I could not find what their nature was, and certainly I have never seen large flying fish in Japanese waters. The banks of the tributary rivers were carefully lined with great snake baskets, which are made of tough split bamboos woven in an open network of wide meshes. They are filled with large stones from the river bed, and seem like enormous sausages as thick as the body of a man, and from 20 to 25 feet long. They are embedded in rows, silt soon accumulating about them, and if not carried away, vegetation springs up and still further guards the banks. The road is lined most of the way with venerable pine trees, and the humble beggar in a Japanese novel always looks to end his days, nameless and forgotten, under the shadow of one of those great trees. The telegraph is seen nearly all the way. In some places great spiders hang tough threads over the path, which crack across your smarting face with a twang almost like that made by a piece of pack-thread. Every few miles or so you find a tea-house, and in busy places there may be several in 1 mile's distance, where you may have a cup of tea and a quiet smoke. As we dashed through Shizuoka with its old ivied castle, where the ex-shogun now lives in dignified retirement, far from the din of the world, we passed some great hulking overfed giants in peculiar attire, one after another in rapid procession, as if one were in a nightmare. They were professional wrestlers who were to perform in town that evening. Soon afterwards we came to a turn of the road, where through a veil of mist we looked sheer down into a boiling, foaming sea, and by a great plain opened out to view, from which arose in ever steeper sweep the great wood-embroidered flanks of Fuji, stupendous and seeming to merge into heaven itself, as I have seen no other mountain do, and not even Fuji from any other single point of view. We had to ascend Hakone Pass in cages. The price agreed upon was declared to be too little, and our gentle bearers began a series of mild persecutions, bumping our poor weary bones, and giving us constant occasion to change our position. I began to see that this little game was proving a very great amusement to our demure Oriental friends, so I passed the word to my companion to take revenge, and a very sweet and prompt one we did make. By raising ourselves well up and rhythmically bringing our whole weight down smartly whenever a bump was planned for us, the poor shoulders of our bearers soon came to ache so badly that "they smelt a rat." A loud but disconcerted laugh was the result, and then we all got on amicably, like good Christians, for the rest of the way. We found the heights of Hakone delightfully cool after the sweltering heat of the plains, and then there are hardly any mosquitoes there. The hills are softly rounded, and when not thickly wooded, are covered with wormwood scrub. Goats seem to thrive on the coarse pasturage, but have not yet been bred to any extent. We crossed the ridge at a height of about 3,000 feet. The little town is spread along the margin of a deep and picturesque lake, which occupies the cup of an old volcano, and in which mountains capped with cottony clouds were reflected as in a mirror. The depth varies about 2 feet according to the rainfall. We had some fishing from a little shallop, but were not very successful. I was told that the following varieties of fish were found in the lake: masu, which is the best; akahara, red belly; funa, namatsu; koi, see design on the cover of this work; eels, and a kind of minnow. Newts and a lizard with a metallic tail of great brilliancy abound. There are toads with reddish-brown spots, adders, and at least 2 varieties of snake, the ao daisho and yamakagashi or yamagashi, as I have also heard it called. The latter bites angrily, but not fatally. Great water spiders were swimming about, and I saw many pale cream-colored butterflies tinted with red on the hinder half of their wings. They were hovering over a sweet-smelling plant like our own honeysuckle, but with stiff, tiny, star-like flowers. Midges were gyrating in swarms as evening closed in, but I saw no swallows there, though they were numerous on both sides of the Hakone Pass below. I was soon striding down the long stone causeway which leads to the plains, outstripping a very determined little policeman in plain clothes, who gave in rather unwillingly to my greater length of limb, and I arrived at Odawara at night. On asking for a glass of water, I got one containing Inter alia, a very beautiful large specimen of Earthworm vulgaris, which almost spoiled my appetite for a jolly dinner I was looking forward to next day in the Royal Hotel, Yokohama, after 10 days' Japanese fare and a tough dyspepsia. End of 10 Days on the Tokaido by Henry Faulds. Read by Awai in May 2015.